story I'm going to share this morning is from Harold Kurlander's collection of African stories titled The Cow-Tailed Switch. And when I'm telling the story this morning, I'm going to be thinking a little bit about David Titus and Trefine Hickman. And when we get to the end, I'd ask you to just hold the silence for a minute because I have a little more to say. Long ago, near the edge of the Liberian rainforest, on a hill that overlooked the Kabbalah River, was the village of Kundi. Its fields of rice and cassava stretched in all directions around the village, and cattle grazed by the river. Smoke from the fires in the round clay houses seeped out through the top of the palm leaf roofs, and the faint columns of smoke coming up from the houses seemed to hover over the village. Now in this village with his wife and many children lived a hunter named Ogalusa. One day Ogalusa took his weapons from the wall of his house and he went into the forest to hunt. His wife continued to tend the fields. His sons drove the cattle down to the river to graze. The day passed. At the end of the day, the family returned home and had their evening meal of manioc and rice. Darkness returned, but Ogalusa did not return. The next day, the day passed, and still Ogalusa had not come back. His sons mentioned it. They knew that he had been in the forest before for a long time hunting, but they had expected him back. A week passed, and still he did not return. A month. His family still tended the crops, and his sons went into the forest to hunt for game. But after a while, they stopped talking about his disappearance. Then one day, his wife gave birth to another son. His name was Puli. The son thrived. He grew, and first he sat up, and then he crawled. And then when it came time for him to speak, the first words the child said were, "Where is my father?" His other sons looked out over the fields and said, "Yes, where is father? He should have been back long ago." Another son said, "Well, maybe we should go. Maybe something happened. We should go look for him." And another son said, "But where would we go? The trail is very cold by now." Another son said, "Well, I saw the direction that he took across the river into the forest. I think I can find the trail. We should go and look for him." So they all got their weapons and they went into the forest. Now it was thick and dense with trees and lots of vines, and they traveled a long way, but then they lost the trail. But another son found it, and so it was. They lost the trail and found it, until finally they came to a clearing. And there, on the ground, were the scattered bones of their father next to his rusted weapons. And they knew that he had been killed in a hunt. One of his sons stepped forward and said, "I have some knowledge. I know how to arrange the bones of a dead person's body into their skeleton." And so he gathered up the bones of his father and he put them back together, each in their right place. And another son stepped forward and said, "I too have some knowledge. I know how to return sinew and flesh to a dead person's body." And he did his work and he returned sinew and flesh. "I know how to return blood to a body," said a third son. He did his work and stepped aside. Another son stepped forward and said, I know how to return breath to a body. And so he did his work, and Ogalusa's chest began to rise and fall, and then he stepped aside. I can give him the power of breath, said another son, and he did his work. Another son stepped forward and said, I have the power to give him movement. And Ogalusa sat up and looked around. Finally, a son stepped forward and said, I know how to give him the power of movement. He worked his skill, and Ogalusa stood up. He looked around. Where are my weapons? He asked. His sons gave him his rusted weapons, and together they went back through the forest, back to the village. And when they got there, Ogalusa went into his house. His wife prepared him a bath, and he bathed. She prepared him food, and he ate. 4 days he stayed in his house. And on the 5th day, he came out and shaved his head, because that's what people did when they came back from the land of the dead. Then he killed a cow for a feast. And he took the tail of the cow, and he wove and braided the end. He decorated it with beads and cowrie shells and little bits of metal. And oh, it was a beautiful thing. Ogalusa carried it with him to all the important affairs. Whenever there was a dance or an important ceremony, he always had the cowtail switch with him. And everyone in the village thought that the cowtail switch was the most beautiful that they had ever seen. Soon there was a great celebration in honor of Ogalusa's return. The people dressed in their finest clothes. The musicians brought out their instruments and started to play. The people started to dance. The drummers drummed and the women sang. The people drank much palm wine, and everyone was happy. And of course, Ogalusa had the cowtail switch with him. Some of the men grew bold and came up to him and asked if they could have it. And he just kept it held in his hand. Sometimes there were so many people coming up that there was a commotion. Even women and children were begging him to give it to them, and he gently refused them all. Then he stood up, and everyone stopped dancing and came close to hear what he had to say. He said, a long time ago, I went into the forest to hunt, and I was killed by a leopard. My sons came for me, and they brought me back from the land of the dead. I am grateful to all of my sons, but I will give the cowtail switch to the one who did the most to bring me home. And that's when the argument started. Well, I was the one who found the trail into the forest. I think he's going to give it to me. Well, no, I was the one who found the trail when you lost it. I think I am most deserving. I was the one who collected his bones and put back his skeleton. I gave him blood. I gave him breath. Back and forth, they were all arguing. Then the people in the village started to join in. Well, I think the brother who gave blood should be the one to receive it. No. They all did something, so they all should share equally. So it went back and forth, everyone arguing their different point of view, until Ogalusa stood up and asked them all to just be quiet. He said, it is true that all of my sons did something to help bring me back, and I am grateful to all of them. But I have only one cowtail switch to give. And so with that, he stepped forward bent down and handed the cowtail switch to Pooley, the little boy. And the people remembered that the child's first words had been, "Where is my father?" And they knew that he was right. For there was a saying among them that a person is not truly dead until they are forgotten. And now I'd like you to join me in a short ceremony. I'm going to ask you to clap with me 3 times like this in just a minute. And then I invite you to say out loud the name or names of people that you want to honor and remember and celebrate their life. And then at the end, after a passage of time, I'll hold my hands up again and we'll clap 3 times. So, together, Florence, Helen, Jenna, Tucky, Richard, John, Archie, Bieber, Sarah, together.